Now, with the advent of GPT and ChatGPT, it became possible to have a system write code for you in response to your prompt. And that in turn gave rise to a series of new tools whose job it was to help you build better prompts and clarify if the system doesn't understand something. So we're talking about tools such as AutoGPT, Baby AGI, and a bunch of other tools. Now, the tool that we're going to be talking about today is similar to those tools, but this tool is different because it has a very, very specific purpose, and that is to build an entire app using just one prompt. And so in today's video, we're going to have a complete overview and tutorial of GPT Engineer, a tool that promises that it can build an entire app with just one prompt. Now, before we get started, as always, all the resources and apps and anything that you might need, you will be able to find it on our amazing Patreon community. And if you're not yet a member, you're definitely missing out. Definitely have a look using the link in the description below the video. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to Google for GPT Engineer, and chances are you're going to stumble on this page that I have open right now. And this is their GitHub repo, which is essentially all of its source code and instructions and everything that you need in order to use this tool yourself. So if you scroll down, there's some instructions on how to set it up. Okay, so for stable release, you need to execute this command. And so you can install and run this tool on just about any machine. So Mac, PC, Linux, or any other kind of machine that you might have at your disposal, you'll be able to install and run this tool. So I actually have a Mac, and so I'm going to show you the exact steps that you need to run in order to set up this tool. But these steps are exactly the same regardless of what kind of machine you have. Now, if for whatever reason you don't want to run this tool on your personal machine, then you can easily run it on a VPS, which stands for Virtual Private Server. And there are all kinds of VPS providers out there, such as DigitalOcean, Linode, and even Amazon's AWS offering has their own VPS provider called Lightsail. And so you can easily create a very, very small instance here, and it's going to cost you almost nothing. But personally, I decided to set it up on my own computer just to simplify the whole process. And so what we want to do is we want to copy this command here and paste it in your command line, okay? The next thing that you want to do is you want to create a directory where you're going to be storing various projects that this tool is going to be working on, essentially various apps that you're going to ask this tool to build. So I already created a directory called GPT Engineer. So if I switch to this directory, you will see that this directory is empty, okay? Now, if you scroll down on the main instructions here, the next thing that you need to do is you need to specify an API key. So I highly recommend creating a new secret key just for this tool, okay? So I'm going to create a new key. I'm going to call it GPT Engineer, create a secret key. I'm going to copy this key, and then I'm going to go back to my terminal and I'm going to type this exact line. And this here works for Mac as well as Linux. For Windows, you need to type this line right here. So I'm going to type export OpenAI API key equals, and this is my key, okay? Now, after you pasted this line, GPT Engineer will now be able to make API calls to GPT using this key. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to create another directory for a project that you're going to be building. So let's say I call it P1 for project 1. Now I'm going to switch to that directory and I need to create a file that's going to contain the actual prompt that I want. So you can do it a number of ways depending on what kind of system you're using. For Mac, I typically do it like this. I just type nano and I type prompt, okay? And for Windows, you can just use a text editor. And for Mac, you can also use a text editor if you want. And now we need to actually insert a prompt. So let's start this demo with something very, very simple. So here I have a very, very simple prompt: develop a to-do app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm going to exit out. I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to go back to the root directory. And now we are ready to execute GPT Engineer and have it create an app for us, hopefully. Now, once you have this prompt in your new folder, you want to execute GPT Engineer and you want to specify the projects directory. So So I'm going to say GPT Engineer, and I'm going to specify P1 because that is the directory of my projects that I have here. So I'm going to press enter. Now, once I execute GPT Engineer, it's doing a couple of things. Now, the first thing that it's telling me is I do not have access to GPT-4 for my API key. And that's true. I'm still on the waiting list. I don't have access to GPT-4 with my APIs, even though I have access to GPT-4 using the web UI. And so as a result, we are going to be using GPT 3.5 Turbo. And I have heard, and this is my experience as well, that GPT-4 is a lot better when it comes to programming tasks than GPT 3.5 Turbo. So whatever the results we get with GPT 3.5 Turbo, they should be a lot better with GPT-4.
Quick interruption. While I was editing this video, I got an email that GPT-4 is now available to everyone in its API form. So initially I only had access to GPT 3.5, but now I was granted access to GPT-4 as well. And this means we now have a much better model to test out this app with and generate code with. So here's the announcement. And so later on in the video, I'm going to be showing you some examples with GPT-4, and we should expect to have much better quality and much better code output, leading, of course, to much better quality apps created from the first try.
Now, the next thing is really, really interesting, okay? So we've given it a prompt, and instead of going out and actually, executing this prompt and building this app like, you would typically do, right? If you're using a web UI or, GPT, ChatGPT, this thing is actually asking me for clarification, okay? So it has 10 questions, and it's, the first one is what specific features should the to-do app have? Should the app have a backend? Or should it be purely client side? Are there any design requirements, etc., etc.? So it's trying to clarify, right? Which is the first thing that sets GPT Engineer apart from, just doing it manually, okay? Now, in some situations, I'm actually clarifying. We're going to do that a little bit later. But right now, I'm just going to press C to continue so that it can kind of figure things out on its own, right? So if I press C and press enter, letting GPT Engineer make its own assumptions. Okay, so now it has its own assumptions. Okay, so it's, it's like the defaults, right? So it's saying to-do apps should have basic features. The app will be purely client side. There are no specific design requirements. Okay, so, it's just making its own assumptions. Okay, now it's telling me what it's going to do based on the assumptions made. Here's the step-by-step breakdown of core classes, functions, and methods, HTML structure, CSS, JavaScript. So I did not give it any of these instructions. I just said, just make a to-do app, okay? So it made a lot of assumptions, and now it's actually generating the code, okay? So it finished generating the code, and now it actually wants to execute this code, okay? So not only does it generate the code, right? So it's saying, that's it. The to-do app is now complete. The index contains HTML. We have CSS for styling, and we have a JavaScript, right? Which is the functionality of the app, the interactivity, right? And now it wants to actually set it up, right? So it's giving me 2 steps: install a web server, start the web server in the code base directory, okay? And then open a web browser to that URL, okay? So we're gonna say, yes, let's execute the commands. Okay, so now it's downloading this web server and it's going to execute it. So that's exactly what it did. So take a look at this, executing the code, and it executed a web server in the directory where the code is. So potentially, if we access this URL here, we'll be able to access the app, because that entire code base, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, right? Very, very basic app. It's in that directory, and that's where the web server is going to be serving files from. So let's see if it works, right? So let's go ahead and access this, and there's our to-do app, okay? Right there, it's built, okay? So let's see if it works, okay? So let's say I add item 1, add, okay, it added it, look at that. And I also have a remove button. I did not even tell it that I want this functionality, okay? That was one of the assumptions it made, okay? So let's try item 2, add, and it's giving us a message that disappears after like a couple of seconds. And let's try item 3, okay? Task added, and let's see if we can remove it, okay? Look at that, remove, remove, remove. We've just removed everything. How cool is that? Okay, so we have an entire app, and it's not just like one file, it's a bunch of files. Actually, you can see exactly what it generated, right? So if I exit out from this web server here by pressing Control C, and did it generate the code? I'm just going to say yes. Yes. Okay, so that's kind of this feedback loop, right? Because if you say no, it's gonna realize that it made a mistake somewhere, and it's gonna learn for the future. Now, if we list this directory, we have this P1 that we created, and if I go into P1, we have memory, we have prompt, and we have workspace. Now, if you remember, the only file that I created was prompt, and so it created memory and workspace. And if you go into workspace, you're going to see all the files. This is your entire app, and now you can take this app, you can, send it to Railway, you can host it on the internet, you can do all kinds of interesting things. And so now, if you take a look at this index, right? So if I, view it, this is my index file, okay? And this index has this JavaScript here, and this is JavaScript right here. So very, very simple JavaScript right here, okay? And it also has like a run script that runs it, right? So if I execute run.sh, it's going to install this HTTP server, and it's also going to run HTTP server, but I can just do it manually, right? Because it's already installed. I can just do HTTP server, and I can access this app, right? I can refresh it. I can do all kinds of interesting things, okay? Now, one of the more interesting things about GPT Engineer is that if you're not happy with the app, okay, so let's say the app works, it has the basic assumptions, it does kind of what you asked it to do, but you want to improve on the app, you want to add more functionality. Well, actually, it's also very, very easy to do. The only thing that you need to do is you need to create a new file in your project directory called feedback, and you need to tell GPT Engineer to use that feedback in order to improve or change the app. Okay, so we're going to create a new file called feedback, and we're going to insert this prompt here. So this app looks nice, but it's very, very basic. If I show it to some investors, in Silicon Valley, I don't think I'm going to get funding for this app just yet. And so what we want to do is we want to style the app with Tailwind CSS. Okay, if you're not aware, Tailwind is a very, very popular CSS kind of library that you can use to style your apps, to style your HTML without using CSS directly. Very, very cool library. I use it in a lot of my own projects, okay? So we're going to exit out. We're going to save this. And then we want to go back to the root directory. And this time we're going to give it a new command. Okay, it's that same command, GPT Engineer P1, right? Because that's the directory where our project is. But this time we're going to add this right here, steps use feedback, so that it uses the feedback and hopefully improves on this app. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute this. Okay, so it's telling us to style the to-do app using Tailwind CSS. We need to make some changes to the index and style CSS. Okay, so it's doing its work, right? Style CSS no longer needed. App.js, no changes. Okay, all right, so now it's telling us, do you want to execute this code? And it wants to install Tailwind CSS over here as well. So we're gonna press yes. Now we're gonna run the HTTP server again. All right, and here's our new app. And now let's try adding some task. Task 1. Okay, there's the task 2. And so while we're able to add tasks, unfortunately, we can't remove tasks. It looks like that functionality was removed inadvertently, probably, but we can't really remove tasks. We can display them and we can add them, but we can't remove that. And so let's see if it's able to add that functionality back if we put a new prompt in the file. Okay, so we're going to go back to this file here. Going to go to the root directory, and we're going to go to this feedback, and along with this main prompt, we're going to add a new prompt. Make sure the user is able to remove items. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and rerun the app. Okay, we're going to rerun the app here, and let's see if it's able to do it. And so here it's telling me that to add the ability for the user to remove items from the to-do app. So it realized that new line that I added, that new prompt, is what we want to be done because the previous one is already implemented. Okay, so here it generated some code again. Let's see if we want to execute it. So it looks like we got an error here. And so let's exit out and let's just run our server manually. So I'm going to switch over to the workspace directory, and I'm going to run HTTP server, and I'm going to reload this app. Okay, so now we're back on this app, and let's see if we can actually delete items. So task 1. Okay, so now it looks like there's a delete button right here. So task 2. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so it's a table. I mean, I probably wouldn't do it with a border, but it's not a text field, so it's fine actually, right? Task 3, and I can, let's see if delete works. Okay, yeah, delete works. So it looks fine, right? We did not specify how we want that list to be, so it made its own judgments, but it looks fine, right? New item 1, and you can also press enter if you want. That's kind of cool. New item 2, and it keeps focus. So it did exactly what we asked it to do.
As a quick comparison, I created the same app using the recently available GPT-4 API. So I used this prompt here. It's a more complex prompt. Develop a to-do app, allow the user to add, remove, and list task items. Show a pop-up message when an item is added or removed. Use vanilla JavaScript and HTML. Style it with Tailwind CSS. So there's lots of things happening. I used all the defaults. And after I finished running this app, this is the app that was displayed. And as you can see, everything works. I can add items. It shows a dialog message here. Item 2, etc., etc. I can also remove items, and it shows me a dialog message. And then I went further and I asked it to add a feature. Okay, so I use this feedback functionality and I said sort the list of items in alphabetical order. And I executed that real quick, and it actually implemented it as well without any problem. So if I add some items here, let's say item 4, it should sort them alphabetically. Okay, so let's say I add 0, that should be at the end, and then let's add alpha, that should be in the beginning, and maybe I add something like, plate, that should be somewhere in the middle. Okay, so there you have it. And it still works. It removes everything and it works great. And I was able to do it right away. I was able to do it without, tweaking with the code, without messing with the code. So next time you use GPT Engineer, you're going to have access to GPT-4 API by default. Okay, so you're going to have a much better model. And so with GPT-4, all the examples that you're going to see in the remaining of the video are going to be better and more streamlined. So there's something to look forward to.
Okay, so now that we've seen a very, very simple example, let's try now a slightly more complicated example. So I'm going to exit out and I'm going to go back to the root directory and I'm going to make another project directory called P2. I'm going to switch to it. And I'm going to create a new prompt. Okay, I'm going to say prompt, and I'm going to paste this prompt here. Develop a Pomodoro timer app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Allow users to set work and break intervals and receive notifications when it's time to switch. Okay, so we're going to save this, exit out, and now we're going to go back to the root directory and I'm going to execute that previous command without the use feedback. Okay, this is a brand new project. And let's see what happens. Okay, so we're executing it. And now it needs areas that need clarification. Okay, what should be the default work and break intervals? Should the user be able to customize the work and break intervals? How should the notifications be displayed to the user? Okay, so let's just keep the defaults, keep it simple, and press C, letting GPT Engineer make its own assumptions. And so it's making assumptions. The default work interval will be 25 minutes, and the default break interval will be 5 minutes. And in fact, I think that's the exact settings that I have on one of my Pomodoro timer apps, okay? And so it's also telling us, based on the requirements, here are the core classes, functions, and methods that will be necessary. Timer class, a UI class, utils. Now let's proceed with the file structure and code implementations. Okay, so it's generating the code still. Let's wait a few moments. All right, now it's done, and now it's giving us instructions in terms of running this app, okay? So we're gonna say yes. So again, we got some errors here when it's time to run the app, but that's not an issue because we can simply switch to the directory, P2 workspace, look at the files. These are all the files, right? We have the app.js, we have index, we have styles, and we can simply run HTTP server here, okay? And so now this HTTP server is serving files from this directory, which is very, very handy. Now, when I try to view the app, I don't actually view the app, and that is because it did not name the files correctly. You see at the end of the file, there's a colon, And if the web server does not find index.html, in this case, it's actually, there's a colon at the end, it doesn't display anything. It simply displays the files in the directory. So we need to make a couple of changes, and that is we need to rename these files to the correct name here in app.js. MV just stands for move, and we also want to do styles. And I think that's it. That's pretty much it. Okay, so now if we restart that web server, let's see if it works. Okay, so there's our app. Okay, so it says here Pomodoro timer, 25 work interval, and let's see if it works. So we're gonna click on start, and it works. Okay, so the timer is going down. Let's say we click stop. Okay, it stopped the timer. Let's say we click reset, and it resets the timer. Pretty cool app. Okay. It's not just, a function or a line or a piece of code. It's actually an entire app. Stop, reset. So now that I know the app works, let's go ahead and style it like we did before, okay? So I'm going to exit out of this web server. I'm going to go to my root project directory, and I'm going to create a file called feedback, and I'm going to paste this prompt. Style the app with Tailwind CSS. Exit, save. Then I want to go back to the root directory, and now I want to execute GPT Engineer with that special setting so that it can use feedback. Okay, we're gonna use P2 for project 2. Execute this, and let's see if it picks it up. To style the Pomodoro timer using Tailwind CSS, you will need to include, etc., etc. We know that. And now it's updating our style CSS, which is the part that actually does the UI styling. Okay, so it's done. Okay, let's see if it works. Starting works. Okay, it doesn't work because I still get an error here, but that's fine. I can simply run it myself. I'm gonna go to P2, workspace, HTTP server, start the app is right here, and if I reload it, nothing happens. Let's go and take a look. Maybe there's some problems with the files. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try executing one of the commands that it tried to execute, but it didn't execute for one reason. We're going to come in here, we're going to execute this ourselves. Let's see if that works. Okay, looks like it worked. And let's go ahead and restart our HTTP server. So I still don't see the restyling being done, but if I take a look at my files, I have a new file called CDN, and that actually loads Tailwind. So I'm going to copy that file, and I'm going to change my original index file. I'm going to add it right here, and let's see if that works. Okay, so we got Tailwind being loaded, and now if we restart the web server here and reload the app, okay, so now it restyled it slightly. Okay, so let's see if it works. Start. Okay, so now it's slightly different font, slightly more aesthetically pleasing, but we didn't really tell it how to restyle it. Okay, so it did restyle it with a little bit of extra work. Okay, press stop, reset. You can start that again. Now let's try telling GPT Engineer that we want to change our settings because the default settings were 25 and 5. So 25-minute work routine, 5-minute rest routine. Let's see if we can change that around to, let's say, 40-minute work routine and 10-minute rest routine. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to exit out, go back, edit our feedback, change the work routine to duration to 40 minutes and rest duration to 10 minutes. Duration to 10 minutes. Okay, let's see if it works. Let's exit out, back to the original root directory here. And now let's go ahead and rerun it, and let's see if it works. And this time it picked up the stylings for some reason again, even though we ran that before. So it's restyling. Okay, so let's see if that works. All right, so now it's telling us here's the updated code for styling using Tailwind CSS and setting the work duration to 40 minutes and the rest duration to 10 minutes. Okay, let's see if that works. 40 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay, so it's changing some code, and it's also doing the styling command. Okay, let's just execute everything. Okay, so far so good. And now this time it actually automatically served our app. Okay, so I don't need to even start the HTTP server. All right, so let's go ahead and reload the app and see if the settings change. And it looks like it's still the same old settings. So here I'm viewing, it still works, but it's still the same old settings. Okay, so if we get out, let's take a look what happened. And the reason this app was not updated is the same issue as before. It generated the new files, but they have that colon. And so let's go ahead and get the app to use the old files. Okay, so I'm gonna rename this to the original names, and let's see, maybe that's gonna make it work. And what else we need? Script, we're gonna remove that. Let's see if that works. Okay, so we still have classes. What is classes? That should be styling. Okay, we have script. All right, let's see if this works. All right, and this is the new app, and look at this. So it redid it again with new styling, but we still have 25 minutes as the work duration. Okay, so let's try start. And now, unfortunately, start does not work. Okay, so something was broken. Okay, let's see if we can fix it real quick. Let's take a look at this index here using script.js. And so what happened was we have the changes, but it says here rest of JavaScript code remains the same, but I overrode the JavaScript because I thought it generated a brand new JavaScript file, and as a result we don't have any logic here anymore. Okay, so definitely an issue, but the UI looks much better. I mean, look at this. Maybe this thing is also gonna like change its length, right? It's gonna be smaller over time. I don't know, but I like this UI a lot better, I can tell you that. All right, so far we looked at building relatively simple web apps. Let's see if it can build other types of apps. So more specifically, let's see if it will be able to build a Flutter app for us, okay? So we're gonna go back to our terminal here, and we're gonna exit out, and we're gonna create a new project directory, P3. We're gonna go into P3, create a new prompt file, and we're going to use this prompt: develop a Flutter to-do app, allow the user to add, remove, and list task items. Okay, so very, very similar to the previous app that we used to build a simple web app, but this time we want to build a Flutter app. Okay, we're going to save this, exit out, go back to the root directory, and we're going to execute our GPT Engineer for our third project. Okay, we're going to execute this. And it's giving us clarification. What should be the user interface of the app? How should the user add a task item? And we're just going to skip all that and just say continue, press C, press enter. It's going to make its own assumptions. The user interface will consist of the main screen. So it comes up with really good assumptions. Okay, so for a very, very basic app, you just, you want an app that kind of makes sense. Chances are it's going to come up with its own kind of instructions. It's going to work really well. All right. So the next thing it did, it gave us an outline, right? Based on the requirements here, the core classes, functions, and methods that will be necessary for the Flutter to-do app. Okay, task item, task list, etc., etc. So it's generating all this. Let's wait a few moments for this to finish. And now it's giving us instructions to install Flutter, install the SDKs, install all that which you need. Okay, so let's try. All right, so even though I have all of this installed, let's see if it installs it correctly. Okay, I just want to see if it works. All right, so it's cloning the Flutter framework onto my computer right now. All right, so now it downloaded the Flutter framework as well as some of the other things, but I still get an error. And that is because when it comes to running Flutter projects, there's a couple of things that you need to do in order to get this code to work. So we're going to exit out. And so for Flutter projects, what you want to do is you can use a tool such as Visual Studio Code, which is absolutely free. And no, you don't need to write any code. You just simply run this tool. And then once you have Visual Studio Code loaded, you want to press Command-Shift-P. And here you want to pick Flutter new project. You're going to select it, and then you want to select application empty because we already have the code generated. Here I'm going to create a new folder, app3 for instance, select folder, press enter, and now I have a Flutter project created for me. This is something that GPT Engineer could not do, and we need this, okay? And so now we have a skeleton Flutter project. Okay, so if you run this app, it says hello world. Okay, this is a very, very generic app that was built for us using this application skeleton. And so what you want to do is you want to take this app and you want to replace it with the files that were generated for us, okay? And so a simple way of putting the code that was generated for us with GPT Engineer is by simply going to your directory here, going into P3, which is that P3 projects, going to workspace here. Now, if you list this directory, you will see that now you have these Dart files there, and these are essentially files for your Flutter app. So what you want to do is you want to type this. Now you're going to have these files, and you want to select these files here, and you want to drag it right to this lib directory, okay? You're going to click on replace, And now what you did is you imported the generated code into your existing Flutter app. Now, if we take a look at this code, it looks pretty good. There's no errors or anything like that, except this file task list. It does have an error. So if I scroll down, this task list doesn't exist, right? There's no task list. There's task list here, but there's no task list here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment it out. And we're going to run this app that was generated for us using GPT Engineer. We're going to go into main Dart and we're going to click on run. And let's see if this app even works. Let's see if it loads. Okay, so there's our task list. Let's press this button here and we have this add task screen here. So let's say task one, add task. And so it's adding it, but it's not displaying them correctly. And that is because somewhere on this task list, it's not listing them correctly. And so if you go into main.dart, you can see that initially it displays this task list screen here. So if you come over here, this is the list that's being displayed. And this task list screen displays this task list widget. And if you go to this task list widget, it has a list view that returns a task item widget, but unfortunately we're not seeing anything. So there's probably some issue with it not displaying it correctly or not adding it correctly because we are not seeing the list here. And so the reality of it is that we have to go back into the code and we need to see where exactly is the issue. And typically it's something small because we have most of the app created for us. And so this is great if you're prototyping, you want to see if something works. Chances are it's going to build the app, but even if it doesn't, you have most of the kind of the scaffolding done for you, right? So I have a lot of these things done and I have, a bunch of files. I don't have just a function or, like a snippet of code. And all I need to do is figure out, is it because it's not displaying them correctly or is it because it's not adding them correctly? And so it's either one or both that need to be fixed. But still, it was able to create a simple app with an add screen here, an add screen that redirects to the list screen. We just need to figure out why exactly it's not listing it correctly. And so what I really like about this project is it's taking the regular GPT and ChatGPT to the next level. It's asking you if you want to clarify something, right? If you want to tweak it, if you want to specify exactly how you want it to be built. And it's actually coming up with a list of things that it might want you to clarify on, right? So this is really, really nice. And it's taking that input, right? So maybe you want to clarify, some of the colors or some of the behavior or the functionality or things like that. It's actually taking that input and putting it into practice. It's actually like implementing that input that you give it and building the app that you want. And additionally, another thing that I really like is the fact that you can improve on the app, right? So you can say, oh, add this functionality or remove that functionality or fix this or fix that. It aims to do a lot, and obviously it fails in some areas, but this is a brand new project and it's a very, very active project. As you can see, it has, more than 36,000 stars on GitHub, lots of discussions happening, lots of activity, lots of interest. And so I do not doubt even for a minute that this project is going to evolve and it's, eventually going to become something very, very interesting, if not groundbreaking. And so definitely check out GPT Engineer, play around with it, see what kind of apps that you can create. And if you want to get started with some really good prompts that you can use either when building the app or enhancing the app, I'm going to be sharing with you my prompts as well as some really good VPS providers on my Patreon community. And so remember, on our amazing Patreon community, not only will you get access to some of the things that I talked about in this video, but you will be able to view and or clone pretty much all the apps that I built on this channel. They're all there. Plus, we have an amazing community with some great people discussing really interesting and cutting edge no-code concepts. And so if you're watching this video right now, you are definitely interested in no-code. So the next logical step is to join our amazing Patreon community. And you can do so via a link in the description below this video.